The sutras that Patanjali gives us on the elements are probably some of the most esoteric and, quite honestly, strange sutras, but they are also some of the most profound in terms of how we can relate these ideas to our own understanding of ourself and how we move throughout our daily life. When I say the elements, what I'm talking about here are earth, space, water, air, fire. Now, if you recall, when we go back to the sutras we were learning about around the gunas and the process of transformation, you break everything down into its component parts, and everything is made up of the elements. So that's what Patanjali is really asking us to do here. In Sutra 321, he says, by focusing on the form of the body through the process of samyama, you can disrupt your flow of light and become invisible to others. What Patanjali is asking us to do is use the form of the body as our object of focus in a samyama practice. Now, what does Patanjali mean by the form of the body? This is where we go back to the gunas and we look at everything as being component parts, and those component parts are the elements. Our body is made up of all of these different elements. The bone would be something that we could consider earth matter or material. Blood and hyaluronic acid and mucus has more watery components to it. Fascia, when you look at fascia underneath a microscope, it has water droplets on it. It has the element of water in it, as well as more solid but almost aqueous structures. So, and then there's space in the body, right? Everything has to exist in space. There's air in the body when we think about gas bubbles that can exist not only in our digestive system, but also in our joints. That's what is popping when we have cracking or popping in our joints. And then fire could be referencing the process of metabolism or digestion and the processes of transformation that happen on a daily basis throughout our entire body so that we can function as this complex system that we are. So when we focus on the form of the body, we can disrupt our flow of light. Now, this references back to the energetic body that we were just talking about, where we bring awareness to our inner light. Why would we want to become invisible to others? In its original context, when ascetics were in their caves meditating, they might have wanted to become invisible. In the context of our daily lives, in our modern world, when it talks about becoming invisible, well, there are some instances where maybe in your life you wished you were invisible. There might be some times when perhaps in a large classroom you wish that the professor wouldn't see you or call on you, and that's when you might want to be invisible. There are times, I know that as an introvert, I wish that I could just be invisible in a crowd, or I don't want people to see me or bother me or talk to me, and I just want to exist in my own little world. So that's how I take this invisibility. Where in our lives could there be situations when we do want to be invisible, when we don't want to be seen? Now, let's talk about this disruption of the flow of light. If we imagine ourselves as all these different component parts of the elements, and if we understand our energy as flowing through us as this flow of light, then what Patanjali is suggesting is that by bringing awareness to how we exist, we can change the energetics of that flow of light such that the flow can be disrupted or blocked so that we don't shine outward, that we are not seen in the world. There might be instances when you don't want to be seen in the world, but there are also many instances when we do want to be seen in the world. So having the ability to manipulate how our energy is flowing through us, how our light is flowing through us, such that we are seen or not seen to varying degrees in the world, could be really, really powerful. And that is the benefit of the practice of yoga, being able to access this more subtle energetic management that allows us to either be seen or not be seen based on when it's safest or best for us in our daily life and in the way that we want to show up and live in the world. So that's how I see Sutra 321. Now, in Sutra 322, Patanjali says by focusing on the form of the body through the process of samyama, you can also disrupt the flow of sound. So same thing, we're using the form of the body and its elements or component parts as the object of focus. And then once we really get to understand how the body functions from a form or from its component parts, then in addition to being able to disrupt the flow of the light through us, we can also disrupt the flow of sound. Now, why would we want to disrupt the flow of sound as it moves through our body? Well, you might want to disrupt the flow of sound so that you can find quiet, so that you can find peace. But also, the example that I always use to explain this is how we exist through sound in our body. There are some people in your life that you might know that they're coming just based on the cadence of their step. Or if you're down in a basement and you hear someone walking above you, you know who it is based on how they step. Some of us step really loudly, some of us step really quietly, and I argue that that is a direct result of us unconsciously managing our energy or carrying ourselves in a certain way such that we walk through the world with sound and with a certain type of sound. Some of us are louder, some of us are quieter. That is an energetic, unconscious energetic choice in how we choose to show up in the world with ourselves and with others. Some of us have loud thoughts, some of us have quiet thoughts. So being able to disrupt how sound moves through our body allows us to potentially find more quiet, not only internally, but also externally, so that we can move through the world more quietly. Now, why might we want to be able to do that? Well, for me personally, the example that jumps out in my mind is wanting to tread lightly around my son while he's sleeping. I have to really manage my body and my energy to creep away extremely quietly right after I've gotten him to sleep. He is very perceptive and he knows when I'm around. And so I have to quietly inch out in those first moments of sleep. Otherwise, he'll know that I'm leaving, or he'll hear that I'm leaving, and he'll pop right back up and start crying again. So for me, that's where I want to be able to figure out how can I move through the world really quietly. And quite honestly, that's hard for me because my body is a little bit louder. I have a very heavy pace, or not pace, I have very heavy step. And that's part of the intensity and the fire that comes through my pitta dosha, if we want to bring Ayurveda into it. My husband, on the other hand, can move very quietly, and there are instances when he could walk into the house and I wouldn't even know that he's there because he is able to move so quietly, and that's something that I struggle with, so that's something that I can work on. Sutra 343 says, by focusing on the relationship between the body and space through the process of samyama, you can gain the ability to travel through space just like cotton. So this is a continuation of the previous sutra where we're talking about how we're managing the energy of our body. And the object of focus here is the relationship between the body and the space that we move through. When we do this, we can travel through space like cotton. And this is a really wonderful example that Patanjali uses. Imagine the dandelions, when they're all white, and when you blow on them and they start to disperse into space and float through the air, there's a grace there. Cotton is so light, you can imagine it just lightly moving through space. That is the quality that we wish to cultivate as we move through space, so that our step is light, so that our sound is light, so that our lightness, our energy is light. And when we can move through space lightly, we are able to not only be in contact with our true self, but also move more compassionately through the world, right? If we have a really heavy step, then maybe that is violent to the earth. So there's ways that we can extrapolate these ideas into how we function in our daily life and in our environment. So it can be nice to really understand how our body moves through space. And science has a word for this. It's called proprioception, our understanding of how we move through space and where we are in space. Sutra 342 goes on to say, by focusing on the relationship between the capacity of your ear to hear and space through the process of samyama, you can gain supernatural hearing. Now, this is asking us to focus on the relationship between hearing and the space that sound moves through. Now, this gives us what Patanjali calls supernatural hearing, but what I like to think about here is, what is it that is happening when there is space and sound? There is listening. We listen when there's sound coming at us, when sound is traveling through space. So when we really think about the capacity of our ear to hear the sound that is traveling through the space around us, we're bringing in not only the words that we're hearing, but the environment and the environmental impact of how those words are coming to us. We're picking up nonverbal cues to construct a better understanding of what is being said. And that would be listening on a very deep level, listening not just with your ears, but also with your eyes and with all your other senses, so that you can construct an understanding that is more subtle than the meaning of the words in and of themselves. And you know that the people in your life that are really good listeners, that is an amazing power to have. It's an amazing benefit to provide to others. It allows you to become more human, and it allows you to develop relationships on a much deeper level. So we could argue that the power of listening here is a supernatural power, in a sense, to be able to be there for others and listen with all of your senses and hear beyond the words. To do that, we have to really utilize all of the senses and understand that the sounds coming at us are not just the words, but also the body language and also what isn't being said. And that requires a lot of practice and the development of intuition. And so that's what I think Patanjali is really getting at here. If we were to apply this to our actual life in relationship with others versus the original context where somebody would be in relationship with themselves only. Although I think that we could argue that we could probably put our supernatural hearing or listening skills to use for ourselves, to be able to truly listen to ourselves and not let our mind hijack what our body really needs or what our intuition is really telling us. Sutra 345 says, by focusing on the following characteristics of the elements through the process of samyama, you can gain mastery over those elements. So first, we look at the gross form: earth, air, water, fire, space. The gross form of the elements means, when you're looking at earth, what is the color? What is the weight? When you're looking at air or you're feeling air, what does that feel like? What does water look like and feel like? Then we move on to the subtle characteristics of these elements. What is our experience of being in water? What is our experience of touching earth? And that experience is more internal and less external. And then we move into the next layer. What is the true nature of these elements when you break them up into their component parts and you get to the essence of the gunas? And then we look at the interconnection, the relationship of the gunas to each other, and how that creates the iteration of whatever it is that we are seeing. And finally, we look at the purpose. So, what does that mean? What is the purpose of this element in its current iteration, and how it is trying to lend itself to whatever it is that it's lending itself to? So we can use the elements in and of themselves as objects of focus to better understand how those elements function. And once we understand how those elements function in and of themselves, we can better understand how those elements function as components of other things like our body or our subtle body or our mind. So each of the elements, when they are an object of focus, we move through this progressive layer of understanding of each of these things, and we could take this same process and apply it to any other object of focus. If you look at this list, it's not that far off from the same lists that Patanjali has been presenting to us in previous sutras when we were looking at the process of transformation and what that looked like. When we're looking at, in the very first chapter, the process of stilling the mind and moving through meditation towards the process of samadhi. These are all generally following the same processes where we start from that gross level and we move through more and more subtle levels. Now, Patanjali in Sutra 346 tells us when we do this, when we use this process of samyama and we focus on these different objects and we receive all these benefits, this is what we really get. We master the elements, we gain 8 powers. They are the ability to become very small, the ability to become very light, the ability to become very heavy, the ability to become very large, the ability to develop a strong will, the ability to achieve all of your desires, the ability to create anything, and the ability to control everything. The body also attains perfection and can no longer be affected by the changing elements. So this is pretty profound right here. Why would we want to become very small? We've already talked about how sometimes we do want to become invisible. We do not want to be out in the world. The ability to become very light allows us to move more quietly through space. But at other times, we might want to become very heavy. The qualities of heaviness can be very helpful to counter the consequences of lightness. The ability to become very large. Sometimes we want to go out into the world. We want to be heard. We want to be seen. The ability to develop a strong will, that really helps us move through the world and move through challenges that are inevitably going to show up in our life. The ability to achieve all of our desires, that's nice. I don't think it needs much further explanation than that. The ability to create anything, when we really understand the elements and how they function, we can utilize them to create what it is that we want in the world. And we can also control our world because we understand how everything functions. So, through that, we attain perfection in the body such that we understand how the body functions and we can manage and manipulate our energy so that we can be in connection with our true self for the most amount of time possible. And when we are in connection with that Purusha, because it is not in the realm of Prakriti, it doesn't get affected by the inherent nature of the gunas, which is that they are always changing. And if you're not being affected by constant change, what is left? Stillness. And to be connected to stillness is to be connected to Purusha, according to Patanjali. So it requires really getting to know and understand the elements and working with the elements in order to find that connection to Purusha, which is a paradox in and of itself. Because instead of saying these elements are in your way, ignore them or conquer them, Patanjali is saying get to know them, work with them. And isn't that a beautiful sentiment if we were to take that out into the world and work with others? Instead of trying to conquer your enemies or your challenges. Get to know them and work with them. That brings up this much more collaborative way of living in the world and living in relationship to others. And there's more kindness and compassion required in that way of living. And that is so much more impactful and has so much more positive power to it. And so that's really what we can gain from these sutras, this ability to live in the world in a way that allows us to better understand ourself and manage and manipulate our own energy, not in a bad way, although it certainly could be done for negative consequences, but in a way that conjures up a collaborative power so that we can be in the world in a way that connects us with our true self and at the same time connects us in relationship with everyone else. And there is so much power in that if only all of us could be living from that space. So some of the principles that I've pulled out from these sutras obviously focus, because we're still working on this process of samyama that requires so much concentration, but also space. That is the element that is really highlighted in these principles, but you could also take any of the other elements out and sequence classes to those elements as well. Light, understanding our own inner light as a flow of energy that moves through us so that we can connect to our true self, so that we can integrate all of these pieces of ourselves as a way to get us closer to that connection. And then I wanted to pull out the purpose principle here too, specifically as it was talked about in the list that Patanjali laid out when we were moving through the gross to subtle. Purpose being the most subtle in that list. When we can understand the purpose of the elements, we gain control and mastery over the elements. But when we can understand our true purpose and what we're here on this earth to do, then we can gain mastery over the direction that we move in life, over all of our decisions that we make. That is really what is alignment to me. Alignment with our true purpose, alignment with our connection to our true self. That's where we become really, really powerful. I hope that this was a helpful inquiry into an insight into these ideas around the elements and how the elements play out, not only in our life on a gross form, but how we can really start to get to know them and how they can start to give us more benefits and powers in our life so that we can connect to our true self and our true purpose.